started, but before we get started, Jackie Estrada from San Diego Comic-Con is here to say something.
So Comic-Con is delighted to have Joe be a special guest this year. It's kind of about time.
Thank you so much.
And you're going to find out about his career during this panel of several decades of contributions to comics, from writing and editing and doing a lot of important things behind the scenes. But Joe, this is Comic-Con's Inkpot Award.
Oh my goodness.
The judge for the Eisner Awards this year, and I run the Eisner Awards, so I got to spend several days with them, and it was a delight. So come on, it's your award.
Blush so early.
I can't tell that you're blushing.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. Really a pleasure to be here. I remember my first San Diego Comic-Con as a member of Milestone in 1994, and that was pretty magical, and that was before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So now it's just absolutely insane, but it's really an honor to get this award among such amazing peers who have also received it.
All right,
so
congratulations. And here's a box. And
oh my
everything
goodness.
to put it in when you
There's a
take it
box.
home.
All right.
Just don't forget.
That's cool, so thoughtful. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so we have to live up to that now. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. That
No
was
pressure.
a great way to start a panel.
No pressure.
Right? Great
Yeah.
energy. We're
Yeah.
here. We're ready. If you are in this room, you know who Joe Illidge is. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway because this is his Spotlight panel. We're spotlighting his career. Joe has had this incredible decades-long career, trailblazing, breaking ground, working on huge names like Milestone, like DC, like Heavy Metal, like Lion Forge, but not just that, working in independent comics, not only as an editor, but as a writer. Your fingers are on all the different pies. You just had an incredible Kickstarter. And I'm excited to talk about your career.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. For me, it really started in part with this special guest here, but we're going to get to him and his part of the timeline. But, it started with me as a kid when I was in the second and third grade. Every Friday, my mom, after work, would take me to the newsstand, and she would buy herself soap opera magazines, and she would buy me comics. So my comics were my soap operas, but I was a very avid reader, so I read my comics and I read her magazines. So at the same time I was a comic book geek, I became a soap opera geek, and I think I was the only one probably in Brooklyn who had hands in both. So, it was pretty awesome, but she really wanted to reward my reading. I had a really good reading aptitude, and we kind of had a social contract, which is, as long as I'm doing good in school, then reading is fine, right? And whatever nurtures my mind, she was up for that. So she supported the reading of comic books at a time when it was not cool to be a black kid in the 70s in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and being like a comic book geek. That was not cool, right? So that was a little bit of a hurdle I had to get over, but those were the stories that just kept me going.
Yeah, you cross those hurdles. Great origin story. Every origin story needs some sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and in a major way, as we know with stories, it all goes back to your parents, right? For good or bad, but my mom was the best mom, and so she was very supportive of that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what did the comics industry look like at the time?
For me, it was really, so I'm an only child, and I think because of that, I really gravitated to teen books. I was about the Avengers, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, but what I was finding was a lack of presence of characters that looked like me. So they would be the token character, the one black character in a sea of white characters. And that was something that I found as this constant, even when I was in the 4th grade, and I have family in Nassau, Bahamas. So my mom would send me to the Bahamas every summer for like 2 weeks. And my mom bought me a maximum of 3 comics on any given Friday. One day my aunt comes back and she brings me 6 comics. So it's like, okay, this is a party. And one of them was an issue of Uncanny X-Men. And if you're one of the other, if you're not white, male, heterosexual with all working limbs, the X-Men changes you, right? Because that's the first time you see people who are different and they're not being respected or celebrated or worshiped. They're being hunted and feared by the world that they live in. And so I was able to connect with that in some way. The DC heroes had it so good, but the Marvel heroes not so much, and particularly the X-Men. And that was a turning point for me. I became a Marvel head, and I became an X-Men head in particular.
So going from being a fan, reading comics, and then starting your career, how did you find your way to Milestone?
So that's a big story. What happened is, so a friend of mine named Jason told me about this company, Milestone, that he was interning at. And you're talking about 1992 to 1993. So internships were not paying at the time. And I did not have it in my mental vocabulary to work for free. So I said to him, okay, that's cool that you're working there. I'm just gonna go back to my 9-to-5 job. And then what happened is I became in between jobs, right? And I really didn't know what was next. I didn't have a plan. I went to High School of Art and Design and School of Visual Arts in New York, so I had an art education, but I did not have the artistic acumen to become a comic book artist. So I didn't know what was next. And various friends of mine said, oh, you should become a writer, you have a lot of good ideas. So I was walking to this newsstand on the corner of Utica and Church in Brooklyn, for anyone who's in Brooklyn. And you see all these comics on a spinner rack, and these are comics you've seen for years. But then I see this issue of Icon, and it had Icon and Rocket, black man, black girl, side by side, surrounded by riot cops. I never saw a comic book cover speak to me that way, because you're talking about the 90s in Brooklyn. I mean, on both coasts, East and West, racial tension was at an all-time high. And none of the comic books were talking about that. I was a big fan of New Warriors because of Night Thrasher, but New Warriors wasn't talking about that. But this cover immediately did. And I knew Milestone was gonna change the world. I knew there was gonna be no going back. And I said, man, I wanna be a part of that. I wanna be here looking at these comic books. I wanna be there making the comic books. And so I had to bite my tongue because I was like, I could hear Jason laughing at me in my skull because now I'm gonna apply for this internship that is not going to pay me. So I go there, I get interviewed, and I meet the founders, one of whom is right here, Dennis Cowan, and it was amazing. I walk into the doors, and this comic book company is owned by 4 black men, and there's this diverse staff, and it's like, wow, this is Wonderland, right? It was this moment of clarity for me because I didn't know that growing up as this nerd, a 70s black kid and an 80s black teenager, which basically equals social pariah. And I had all my friends telling me, Joe, you are never gonna get any sex if you keep talking about these comic books, right? So to think that my love of these things had a business application and there was a future for me. You know, I interviewed there, and you know, I've been reading comics since the 2nd grade. So I walked in with a chip on my shoulder, maybe chips on both shoulders, possibly, right? And but you know, Jason vouched for me with the higher ups, and so they brought me on the internship. And I remember, you know, with Dennis, he was the one that really let me know, okay, you're gonna have to work here. Like, you're gonna have to work to make it. All of us are working hard. So
Did I say something like that?
You did say something like that. It was really something. You listen. You were one of the leaders. Listen. But I wanted to have you here because we do this thing in our culture where we say thank you after people are gone, and we don't say thank you while they're here. And you were the one that came up with the idea of Milestone when that was insanity. But you were, I call you the first founder. It originated in your head. And then you brought along the others and you made this dream. And that dream gave me direction. So I just wanted you to be here, for me to give you your flowers in person.
But this is your panel, so
it is my panel. But you are the Obi-Wan of the origin story. So this was where it began for me, and this was where the clarity of my purpose began in this world.
Amazing. And maybe Dennis, you can speak to this too, but what was the mission of Milestone at the time? And Joe, when you joined the team, what was your mission?
The mission of Milestone at the time that we met Joe was to do multicultural comic books for a diverse audience, to bring more characters of color and different sexual orientations and different genders into comics in a way that hadn't been expressed before. My original idea, and I often say this, the original thing happened while I was at a Comic-Con. And I was like 1991 Comic-Con, and I had been working on the idea a little bit before, but nothing had ever really come of it. But I literally woke up on a Friday at Comic-Con. I was like, holy shit, I gotta do this thing. So I called up Michael Davis, right? And we took a walk around. He told me I was crazy. He told me you're crazy if you're trying to do anything like this. But since you're so crazy, I'm with you. I said, okay. But neither one of us know how to write, so we gotta get a writer. So Dwayne was at the Comic-Con also. So we called Dwayne at the same Comic-Con. Dwayne, come downstairs. I gotta talk to you about something. Oh man, what? Just come downstairs. So he came down, and with me and Michael took a walk around the whole Marriott, around the back and where the boats are and stuff, and walked all the way around. And I pitched Dwayne my idea. I said, Dwayne, here's what we can do. Black comic books done by black people with like all black characters. It's gonna be black. And he looked at me and said, I was like, that's my bright idea. He looks at me and goes, well, okay, first of all, you're crazy. Like he said the same thing Michael did. And he's like, you're crazy. But since you're so crazy, okay, I'll be crazy along with you and do this. But crucially, he changed it even then. Because my idea was like to get together to do these things, to put these books out. His idea was that we have to expand it. It has to be more than black people. It has to be multicultural. It has to encompass all the things, even the things that we find uncomfortable ourselves. Or you're not doing it right. So I'm like, you mean with gay people? And you need people who want to like that? He's like, yeah, all of that. All of that. So we all had to grow up real fast, past that vision of just black to all of that. All the people who aren't represented as much as you can, every way you can. So, by the time you were there, that mission was like much bigger.
Yeah.
But the initial idea was mine, and it was very simple. Let me get my friends together, we can do this thing. To Dwayne looking at me saying, that's great, but we're gonna really do this thing, we're gonna expand it so it means something.
Yeah.
So that's really the origin.
Yeah, that's, and there's another aspect to what Milestone was that was really important. Is Milestone was an incubator. It was a mechanism of elevation because it understood that the same way we think of generational wealth in terms of money and in terms of real estate, we need to think of generational wealth in terms of talent, in terms of creators and executives. And so it elevated people. And so I understood that that mission was the elevation of everyone, right? Because everyone deserved to have heroes, and everyone deserved to tell those heroic stories, because for most of the comic book history, everyone's stories were only told by people from one background.
I mean, that's really, really fascinating, and I feel like that as your official professional origin story, I mean, you've seen that kind of reverberate throughout your career. So how did the comics industry at the time react to Milestone?
You know, it's funny, from my perspective, there were two things. There were the people that were so excited, like, you know, you say there's a proverb about the pebble in the pond. Milestone was not a pebble. Milestone was a boulder. It hit the world wasn't ready for it, but you don't know what you are missing until it comes at you. You don't know how deficient you are. You don't know how deficient the world is, and then it's there. And so there were the people that were so excited and didn't realize that they had been deprived for so long because they were used to malnutrition of representation, right? So there was that. Then, of course, there were the people who I would say resented its power and resented its impact and either did not support it or actively, either passive aggressively or aggressively fought it, right? So, you know, from my perspective, every day and every week was the continuing of the mission, but it was so exciting that we would not rather be anywhere else. And when you had people like Quincy Jones and Carl Lumbly and Vernon Reed, these people were coming there. That's when I understood this was beyond comics. This was like a massive global change of our understanding of heroism, and it attracted people from these different artistic fields.
It sounds like, I mean, it's a cultural thing, right? It's a cultural shift.
100%.
It's the moment, and it does grow to beyond comics. So how long were you at Milestone, and how did you transition to the next thing?
I was at Milestone for 4 years, and then I transitioned to DC Comics. A friend of mine, Alisan Morales, was an assistant editor there, and at the time, DC would hire temps to be assistant editors through temp agencies. So I went through that process, and I came on board, and I was an assistant editor in a variety of their really offbeat books, because I feel like DC Comics in the 90s had emulated Marvel in the 70s, where any crazy idea, they would say, let's manifest that and see if it works. And so I was working on books like Resurrection Man, Chase, the Tangent line of books that Dan Jurgens imagined as a recalibration of the DC superhero universe. So I was working on some really cool projects, but because I was a temp, legally I wasn't an employee, and I couldn't get credited in the books, right? So there's a lot of books with a little bit of my DNA in there, and I couldn't get credited. But what happened was, after that temp run ended, I had this short stint at Simon & Schuster. I was working in the Star Trek department. And I went to DC Comics on a Friday, and I said to a guy named Jordan Gorfinkel, who was the #3 person in the Batman department, I said, Gorf, which everybody called him Gorf. I said, Gorf, I got this great idea for an Oracle 10-page story. I loved Oracle even back then. And he was like, okay, that's cool, but I want to talk to you about something else. And I said, okay, what you got for me? He said, Scott Peterson, who's a #2, is leaving the Batman editorial department, and we have an opening, and do you want to join? I'm like, what? You know, I'm like, you got the right guy? And okay, so this is a Friday. So Saturday and Sunday, I'm stewing over this, and I'm like, okay, I want to do this, but how do I go to my bosses at Star Trek and say, thank you for giving me a job that I've only had for 7 weeks, I'm leaving you now, right? Because I was raised with like this sense of ethics and loyalty. You don't start a job and then just bounce out of the job, right? But it was Batman. And so I said, okay, so Monday morning, I go to one of my bosses, her name is Marguerite Clark. She had been a DC editor as well as a Marvel editor. So she was a legend, and she went over to Star Trek. And I said, Margaret, I have to talk to you about something. I said, I really appreciate the fact that you all gave me a job when I needed it, but I got an offer to work in the Batman department under Denny O'Neil, and I don't know what to do. And she said, what, are you kidding me? You should run over there and take that job right now. And it's funny, you know, I was young at that time, so I needed someone to give me the permission to be courageous. So she gave me the permission, and I walked pretty quickly. And I did take the job. And at the time, what I didn't even realize that ever since 1939, when Batman, you know, exploded onto the scene in Detective Comics 27, there had never been an editorial person of color in Batman. And this was 1998. So we're talking 59 years.
Has there been one since you?
Yes.
Who?
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's Nachi Castro, who's now Nachi Marsham.
Right.
Jessica Chen has been there.
Jessica Chen's black.
Jessica Chen's Asian, but I mean of color, but just black.
Black.
Yeah, probably just Nachi Castro.
Okay.
Right. So then I realized that was an important responsibility, and then I said, okay, I'm going to continue the mission of Milestone here in Gotham City, and I'm going to be Sojourner Truth, and I'm going to be the gateway to bring in Black creators who usually have been left on the outside because the system's institutional prejudices assumed that Black people did not have talent that was equivalent to non-Blacks, right? And I did that. You know, we started with No Man's Land, which was this big one-year weekly event that was unlike anything that had ever happened in the world of Batman because it was very much grounded. And so that gave us an opportunity to have different creators on different stories. And so I was able to bring in writers like Stephen Barnes and Eric Battle and Stephen Harris. So that was a way to continue the mission right there at the epicenter of the #2 publisher of comics, right? And that was where I began to truly understand what intellectual property was and how intellectual properties have rules that must not be broken under any means. And Batman was both the most rigid and yet most paradoxical, because there were 2 or 3 generations of people who knew Batman and had different expectations for Batman. And those all had to be reconciled, right? So that was the start of that journey for me, that second part of the mission.
How did your time at DC shape your career?
So, you know, when I was at Milestone, I was starting, and I was learning. I was truly a student and soaking it all up. And when I got to DC, I had the confidence that, well, I just got trained by some of the best people in comics. I got trained by Dwayne McDuffie, who is a story genius. I got trained by Dennis Cowan, who's an artistic genius. Derek Dingle, who's a financial genius. Michael Davis,
Who's?
All-around genius. And in the shadow of that, and I did not know at the time, Christopher Priest, who is truly one of the great intellectuals of comics.
Well, yeah, it should be mentioned, because I don't always forget this, but sometimes I do, that Christopher Priest, well, along with Dwayne and myself and, you know, and the others, really shaped the Milestone universe. He was supposed to be a part of Milestone. But when we presented it to DC Comics, and they accepted the deal and they wanted to do it, they also offered Priest a job, right? To be like to be an editor.
That's right.
So it was like, okay, I can go with Milestone, those guys, which I helped build, or I can be the inside guy at DC.
Yeah.
So he decided to be our inside guy at DC and be our editor, and that's what happened with Priest. But he was
Wow.
always a part of the original, all the static stuff, all those story lines, all the icon, all Crockett, all of it. It was him and Dwayne, and me, whatever I could say,
Yeah.
who came up with so much of that material.
Yeah. So when I was in DC, I walked in with that knowledge, and then I had the courage to fight for what I believed in. So I would fight for creators to get better page rates. I would fight for Black creators to work on Batman. And there were times when it was easy, and there were times when I made people's skin go beet red with rage. And they would still give me what I wanted, right? But I learned that you had to fight for vision, because I was naive enough to believe that everyone acknowledges that a good idea is a good idea. But some people are still gonna make you fight for the good idea. So that's what I did. One example of that was Batman the Hill. And Batman the Hill was this book about Batman discovering this neighborhood in Gotham he had never been to called the Hill. And when he went there, the brothers laughed at him. They never saw him before. They weren't afraid of him. They were like, who is this fool in a costume walking around our streets? So Batman had to confront his institutional prejudices. And, Christopher Priest wrote this, Sean Martinborough illustrated it, and Priest brilliantly did not make this a white savior story. Batman did not save the kid who was at a crucial point in his life. That kid saved himself, and Batman helped accelerate the process. Now what happened was, because of Batman No Man's Land, a bunch of books that were in development were rendered obsolete. And we were heading into the year 2000, total relaunch. So there were a number of books that were not going to come out. They were going to get shelved. And Batman the Hill was one of them. That book was not going to come out. Jordan Gorfinkel started that book. And I saw it in the flat file. And I knew this was too important to not come out. I would say this is where I developed the arrogance of the idea of I won't accept that. And so I'm going to fight within the system to get this done. And I pulled it out, and we finished the book. I kind of slid it in under the radar, and we did it, and it came out, and it was really this marker, right? We were covered in the Source magazine, and again, like Black people saw a social truth connected in a comic book, which is the superheroes aren't always there for them. And sometimes they have to save themselves. So that happened so that when we went into the year 2000 relaunch, I felt confident enough to go to the higher ups in DC and say, Butch Guy should be drawing Birds of Prey. Sean Martinborough is your guy for reimagining Detective Comics as a crime noir series with Greg Rucka, the novelist, right? And with Birds of Prey in particular, a book that I inherited again from Jordan Gorfinkel, who's, one of the most important people for me when I was at DC Comics. This was a story about friendship, the friendship between two women who never saw one another. And I said, okay, we need to end that. They need to meet. Their friendship needs to go to the next level. And so I worked with Chuck Dixon and Butch Geist, and we crafted this story to make that happen. And I'm so proud of that. Birds of Prey is one of my favorite books and my favorite editorial accomplishments.
It's amazing. And I think you kind of just answered this, but what lessons did you learn during your time at DC that you've brought on throughout your career afterwards?
Fight for what you believe in.
Yeah.
Even if and inevitably when it will get you in trouble. And I've had a career where I've really fought for what I believed in, and life has no meaning if you're not gonna have courage, right? So for me, it was like, okay, I'll take my scrapes and my hits, but every time I win for somebody else.
Right on. You mentioned Birds of Prey as one of your favorite things that you've worked on. What other parts of your career are things that have really stuck with you?
Well, the next thing I would say would really be the Catalyst Prime universe for Lion Forge. And what happened was, again, this comes back to Milestone, the CEO of Lion Forge, David Stewart II, he was very inspired by Static Shock, the way 2 generations of people were inspired by Static Shock. And he said, I want my own Static Shock, I want my own Milestone universe. And so they came to me and said, will you build this for us, right? And I said, okay, great. Now, Milestone had a Bible of the Dakota universe that was over 100 pages. And the Batman department had this Bible that was over 50 pages. So when I get on board, I said, okay, show me your Bible. And it was a 4-page document. And I said, no, really, show me the Bible. And they were like, this is it. And I'm like, okay. And then I said, what are your budgets? And they told me, and I said, okay, listen, you are committing suicide already going for the territory that is carved out by Marvel and DC. But if we're going to be crazy together in the tradition of Dwayne McDuffie and Dennis Cowan, then you need to make these competitive budgets so I can get you the best talent, and we need to swing for the fences. And they did. There was $20,000 of material that they pushed aside, and we started all over again. And I built the writer's room. Christopher Priest was a part of that. I felt that that was poetic, that the man who was part of the creation of the Milestone universe would be part of the creation of the 21st century Milestone. And we brought together some of the best writers in comics, Brandon Thomas, Amy Chu, David F. Walker, Sheena C. Howard, Joe Casey, Alex DeCampi, Raymond Govea. We brought the best artists, the best letters, the best colors, and we did it. We launched this in 2017. When it was announced in 2016 in New York Comic Con, it was part of the story of New York Comic Con 2016 was the revamping of Lion Forge and Catalyst Prime. So what that did for comics, which was basically keep the seat warm for Milestone, which was very important because the absence of Milestone meant there was no superhero universe like it out there. That vacuum needed to be filled. So to do that, and again, to help elevate people so that they could move forward further in their careers, that was great. And it was a continuing of the mission, and it's something that I'll always be proud of. And I'm really thankful for all the people who came aboard and took a risk, but came aboard for a pretty amazing ride that fans today still love and still say, I wish that was still here.
I think everyone here knows you as an editor and writer of comic books, but you also write articles, op-eds. How is that tied into your career mission?
So, part of what really continued to invigorate me was the continuing of the Milestone mission, and in a more focused way, the continuing of Dwayne McDuffie's work. Because when Dwayne McDuffie died, as a mentor and a friend, I will be honest with you, it broke me. I was shattered. But after I was able to mourn him with friends and loved ones, I realized that the industry was gonna close up and just everything that Milestone did was going to disappear because the narrative was going to be, well, there will never be another black writer as good as Dwayne McDuffie, so why should we even try?
There'll never be another Black Panther.
So why should we even try, right? And I saw the closing up happening, and again, I said, that's unacceptable. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna do the thing that no one in comics can do, which is I'm gonna be the scalpel, and I'm going to examine comics from a fan standpoint and a business standpoint and make it look at its own inadequacies and help activate the conversations that would move things forward, right? So as a columnist for Comic Book Resources, with thanks to Jonah Weiland who brought me on, and people who are now major figures in DC like Rob Levin and Albert Chain, who at the time were there in CPR and really helped me. We did the series of columns that really activated conversations about characters like Luke Cage from a social perspective, talking about Amanda Waller from a social perspective and not as these monolithic villains or heroes, but what is it about the symbolism of Luke Cage going back to the Attica riots? What is it about a bulletproof black man that means something? What is it about Amanda Waller, who must have been a kid during the civil rights movement and the time of people like Assata Shakur and Angela Davis? And how does that get you to the road that you're in, right? So being able to do that, as far as I'm concerned, was a continuing of the mission, because by outlining the industry's inadequacies, part of those inadequacies are the people that you are refusing to elevate. Mm-hmm. And those are voices of color.
As an industry expert, doing commentary, but also just looking at it right now, what interests you about the comics industry right now?
That it is more diverse than it has ever been historically, right? Up until maybe the late 90s, the superhero genre was the dominant genre in comics. And now it is the niche genre in comics. And so we're seeing all of the genres in comic books as standard operating procedure, and we're seeing a growth of people who are not men. There are more women in comics now than there have ever been. There are more of the comics that are purchased by women than men, right? And comics have expanded beyond the comic book stores into the trade book publishers, and when you go there, the editors, the executive editors, the editorial directors are predominantly women. So we have seen a major shift in gender parity, not yet achieved, but we are closer. And we've seen a major expansion of the kinds of stories that we can tell. More work to be done, but we're closer.
Yeah, and speaking of the work to be done, what are you working on right now?
So right now, one of the things that I'm doing now is transitioning my life to flip the paradigm. So it's been 90% editorial and 10% writing, and I'm not flipping it in the other direction. And I've been on the planet for 54 years. I think I have some things to say. I think I've lived long enough that I know how to say them. And so I really want to join the writers whom I've admired and helped elevate. I want to get on the front lines with them as a writer. And so that is the next stage of my life primarily. So one of the things that I'm doing now is the biography of Harriet Tubman as a middle grade graphic novel. Now this is based off of the authorized biography of Harriet Tubman. It's authorized by the Harriet Tubman estate. But there's never been the story told for the middle grade, the 9 to 12-year-olds. And I feel like it is crucial to get to them, right? It is crucial for them to understand the adversity that came before them, that those things that they have that are automatic were fought for by people like Harriet Tubman, who had slashes on her back from being whipped multiple times when she was 6 years old, who lived for over 30 years and did not own a pair of shoes, whose entire life purpose became freeing slaves. There was no other purpose. And for her, it was freedom or death. There was no third option. That is not hyperbole. It's important for young people to understand this. So being able to do this is a real honor, and it's coming along pretty well, and it'll be illustrated by Marcus Kwame Anderson, and it's supposed to come out in 2026, so fingers crossed.
Great. Oh, what else are you working on?
So the next thing that I'm really excited about, and this is a bit of a geek button thing, but I've been talking about this Image Comics project that I'm doing, and it's interesting because the Epiphany Engine graphic novel that just got funded, which is 45 Black publishers and over 85 creators and 50 characters from throughout 30 years of Black publishing, kind of represents this convergence point of the mission of Milestone and that geek button from falling in love with Crisis on Infinite Earths when I was in high school. And so this is a book for which I'm editorial director and co-art director, and it has just been fully funded on Kickstarter. A number of the creators involved are actually here in the audience, and It's going to be coming out next year, but this is the forward movement. The same way Milestone was a boulder in the pond that inspired 2 generations. Epiphany Engine, hopefully 30 years from now, will do the same thing and be a beacon. So there's that, but then that transitions to Image Comics, and what I'm working on there, I'm working on a project for Image, and I'm working on a project for Mad Cave. Mad Cave is one of the most innovative publishers out now. I'm sure you heard about the big deal they just did with Joe Quesada, who is one of the most influential editor-in-chiefs that Marvel Comics ever had. So we'll talk about that project in a few months, but the Image project is really significant to me, and it's gonna involve this guy right here, Spawn. So as we know, the creator of Spawn, Todd McFarlane, literally changed comics. Todd McFarlane was one of a group of artists working for Marvel Comics, making Marvel millions and millions of dollars and not feeling that they were compensated properly. So 7 artists left Marvel and DC and started Image Comics. And Todd McFarlane started with Spawn. Spawn is in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest running series with no interruption. And so I'm working on a project in the Spawn universe as a co-writer, and it's funny because I still remember buying Spawn #1. I still remember that moment, and Image just came out of nowhere and took comics by storm to the point where there was one month that they were the #1 company. They had more market share than Marvel, DC, Valiant, all the others. So you're gonna learn more about the Spawn universe title in time, but when you learn the details, you will see that it is a straight line continuity of the Milestone mission, and it's going to be high adventure and horror, and it's really going to deal what happens, you know, in the aftermath of trauma. What happens when one moment changes your life irrevocably, how you go forward with that, and how that trauma is connected to Spawn. And so it's going to be right at the core of Todd McFarlane's Spawn universe. I'm very excited about that. But the next project is the project that I'm the most excited about. So I am going to get to go back home to Milestone after leaving them in 1997, and I'm writing the Shadow Cabinet for them. And you know, the Milestone relaunch that happened in 2021 was really amazing, really heartwarming. And the fans have been waiting for what is next for a year. And it's so funny because, and Dennis, I know you experience this, you'll see all these groups on Facebook and people are talking like, what's going on? When are they coming back? This and that, and you have to keep your mouth shut.
Any more static?
Yeah,
all that stuff.
And so we have been secretly working on this for...
And you can't say anything.
You cannot.
Just look at the post and you're like...
You cannot love it, you can't like it, you can't comment, you can't do anything. And we've been working on this for almost a year and a half. And so the Shadow Cabinet is going to be to the Milestone universe what Avengers Endgame was to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so if you've read all the books of the Milestone relaunch, your homework is to reread them. And if you've never read them, your homework is to read them. And if you decided that you just want to jump into this, you can do that. But at the core of this is really a story about Rocket, right? Who's a character who has traditionally been a sidekick, and she comes to the front, and how this secret society of superheroes and her life intersect. And really, there's a major threat ahead. It's something that the Milestone universe has been teasing towards for some time, but we're going to do it. And, you know, it's all about character journeys. The Milestone comic books really taught me about character journeys. And so this is really going to be a journey at the core about 2 black women. One of them is Rocket, and one of them you'll find out a bit later. But this is going to be about people finding out they're made of more than what they thought they were, but they're going to have to suffer first. So it's going to be coming out in November. We are confident that everyone is going to like it, whether you're a Milestone fan or not. As long as you're a fan of good comics and characters that you can care about, we're confident that you're going to like this.
That is so exciting, and everyone remember November 5th is when this hits shelves.
In your Google Calendar. Put it in your Google Calendar.
And figure out when the final order cutoff is. Get it on your pull list. Pre-order.
That's
Pre-orders
it.
are important.
That's it. That's it.
I think we have time for 2 questions. If anyone has any questions, yes.
So throughout your career, you've been a torch bearer of craftsmanship and editorial excellence. What direction would you give for the next generation of creators so that we can maintain that same level?
You know, the first thing I would say is know your value, know your monetary value, but really know your value. Creative people are the engines of our society, and they have been fed a narrative since the beginning of time that they are only tools, that they are the best hammer, the best wrench, the best screwdriver. That is not the case. They are the fuel of society, because if one day every artist in comics said, we're gonna draw everybody else, but we will not draw Superman. Superman dies. And that's how you know that it's the creators. So you will strive for excellence when you know your value and you know your purpose. That would be, I would say, my core advice.
One more question. A great answer. One more question. Yes.
Yeah, when you're talking about going into DC, and if you wouldn't mind talking on Priest's behalf, when you got into these situations, did you see yourselves as kind of like FBI espionage, doing little things here and there, or were you clanging pots and pans and letting everyone know things are changing?
Wow, emotionally, you are clanging pots, but you have to operate with a kind of tenor, right? And you have to be able to prove it. You have to bring receipts and prove your position so that if you are denied, it is not because of the quality of the work of anyone you are submitting. If you submit talented people and they are denied, there is only one reason why they are being denied. So you have to go with the best people and say, this is the right person for the job. This is not in question, right? And you know, when it came to like Batman the Hill and the work of Priest and the work of so many people, again, these are people that laid the groundwork for us. And one of the things that, you know, I also got from Milestone is you have to put your hand back and bring people forward, right? You can't go into comics and say, okay, I'm only gonna look forward. I'm not gonna look back at the elders who got me here. Like, I have to respect them. And so that's why that had to be the case. But you have to operate as a professional, because if you go swinging like a hammer, the system will resent it and they will push you out.
Joe, you were talking about kind of being the person, the full person as opposed to just the tool. Take the next few minutes to wrap up and tell us about like kind of your life as like beyond just creator.
Okay, well, I'm a married man of 5 years. My marriage is the biggest crossover event of my life. And the most important one. And the one that has made me a better human being. And I remember I was having a really bad work day one day, and my wife said to me, you have the coolest job in the world. You get to work with creators and make them manifest their ideas and make dreams come true. And ever since then, I never complained about the job. I may complain about the inadequacies of the system, but I will never complain about the job. The job is an amazing job, and it's an amazing purpose.
That's an incredible answer.
Thank you, thank you.
You give so much better answers than I would ever give to any of these questions. I'm just sitting marveling at you. I'm like, oh my God, I would never anything like that eloquent or that good.
You guys gave me the proper core material. But you know, ultimately, you know, I want to continue to be of service to this industry. I want to continue to help creators I have really been on the front lines in terms of racial diversity, and so I feel like part of my next mission, in addition to being a writer, is to fight for economic parity. There's not enough money being paid to the people that make these amazing stories that are fueling corporations and billions of dollars and literally changing the world. And that's something that I want to fight for, and I want to do that by educating creators from a business perspective and hopefully inspiring people to be crazy and fight for yourself and take chances.
That's an incredible mission and something I think we can all learn from and also adopt in our own lives. Everyone, please put your hands together for the amazing